The Honourable Member Russell Norman.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I rise on behalf of the Green Party to talk on this Imprest supply debate, and rather a broader debate about the government's economic performance and social policy performance and what the alternatives might be. Mr Speaker, contrary to the government's position, the world is changing. Climate change is becoming a central issue for governments around the world, if not for the New Zealand government. Many governments around the world are investing in sustainable transport and putting their investments towards sustainable transport rather than the direction that this government's going. And people all around the planet are embracing the importance of the environment and protecting the environment, even while we have a government in New Zealand that is hell-bent on destroying the environment. This is the kind of world we're inheriting. It is changing. And of course the government members say rubbish, but of course actually the world is changing, even if the National Party doesn't realise it. It's also important to realise that issues of inequality, which characterised the policies of governments in New Zealand through the 80s and 90s, driving an increase in inequality, that has now become a global problem. And even very orthodox organisations such as the International Monetary Fund and the OECD are both very concerned about the impacts of inequality, even as our government increases inequality and doesn't consider it to be a serious issue. In a world where we have these new challenges and issues that were once put to one side have come to the fore, we have a government stuck in last century, and it is most unfortunate for New Zealand because instead of embracing the opportunities for the 21st century, we're kind of locking ourselves into the 20th century. We need some new ideas and we need some modern thinking in order to take advantage of the opportunities and the amazing innovation that's going on around the planet. And we need a government that can actually recognise that can see that we need new ideas to solve these old problems, and we need some new ideas to solve the new problems as well. And the Green Party is very much oriented towards that. We will, in government, focus on investing in children and our environment. We'll help New Zealand embrace the economic opportunities that are coming our way, rather than turning our back on them, as is the current government's practice. Let's compare some of the reality against the current government. So the National Party's focus is on coal and oil. That's one of their major economic development strategies. On Planet Key, the Prime Minister goes and opens the national headquarters of Bathurst Coal, which is a coal mining company that wants to destroy a beautiful natural ecosystem on the Denniston Plateau, where we have kiwi habitat, in order to extract coal. They're very focused on supporting the oil industry, so they've opened up a marine sanctuary to oil exploration, even though it's likely to drive those last 55 Maui's dolphins towards extinction as a result of the impacts of seismic surveying, which is like very loud noise underwater which deafens the dolphins and drives them towards more dangerous places, and also because of the risk with exploratory drilling of oil spills. This isn't about the existing production facilities in Taranaki, this is about new exploration. So that is the National Party's focus. So you would think that what must be happening around the world is a huge focus on the oil and coal industry. In fact, the fastest growing sector in electricity generation globally right now is the renewable electricity sector. So the International Energy Agency says to us, because they're the ones who keep the statistics on this on behalf of the New Zealand government and other governments, the fastest growing sector internationally is renewable electricity generation. And yet we have a government in New Zealand which is firmly focused on the 20th century, even the 19th century when coal was king, very focused on coal and oil in the 19th and 20th century, while the whole world is embracing renewable energy. Of course, New Zealand could be a global leader in renewable energy, particularly electricity, because we have considerable experience in it. In geothermal electricity generation, we are in fact world leaders. But it is very difficult for those companies to take advantage of that situation because we have a government which directs all its support towards the fossil fuel industry rather than supporting the renewable electricity industry. Where New Zealand could be taking a lead, instead we're facing and supporting the industries of a bygone century, and we're getting locked into what the OECD Secretary-General called stranded assets as we lock ourselves into these very old carbon-intensive industries. So while the National Party government's heading down a coal and oil path, the reality is the rest of the world's going towards renewable electricity. Let's think about some of the other issues that this government's heading in a different path. Climate change. So when you look at the government's own projections on greenhouse emissions, New Zealand's greenhouse emissions are to increase by 50% in net terms over the next decade. That's according to the Ministry for the Environment projections under current policy settings. There is no other country within the advanced countries that is planning to increase its net greenhouse emissions by 50% in the next decade. You would be a struggle to find any country on the planet that is going to increase its net emissions by 50% in the next 10 years. There will be some, but no other advanced industrialised countries. So New Zealand's climate policy is deep denial. So the government, as on so many things, is in denial about the science, and so doesn't want to confront the science around climate change, and so is proposing to increase New Zealand's net greenhouse emissions by 50% over the next decade. Now, when you think about it from the point of view of the planet, of course it's a disaster. When you think about it from the point of view of New Zealand's economy, it's a disaster as well, because we are locking ourselves into carbon-intensive industries, which over time will become stranded assets and will be extremely poor quality value producers for the New Zealand economy in the future. The Green Party, by contrast, has looked to the world. And in the rest of the world, we're seeing action on climate change. In the rest of the world, many countries are introducing real prices on carbon. The Green Party put forward a plan, a climate tax cut plan, whereby we introduce a price on greenhouse emissions in the New Zealand economy in order to drive innovation. And the revenue that's raised from that climate tax cut, from the carbon tax, is returned to taxpayers in the form of a tax cut. So households would be better off because they would get the first $2,000 of income tax would be taxed at 0%. The first $2,000 of income would be taxed at 0%. So that's the tax cut for households. And companies would face a lower company tax rate, a reduction in 1% in the company tax rate from 28 to 27%. The climate tax cut is all about saying that we do need a price on greenhouse emissions. The OECD is absolutely clear that this is a cornerstone of any country's climate policy. So we need a price on greenhouse emissions. But we want to make sure that the revenue that is generated by that price on greenhouse emissions is returned to households and companies in the form of a cut in income taxes, so the first $2,000 tax-free, and a cut in the company tax rate. So that means that New Zealand businesses that are innovating and are becoming less carbon intensive get a double win. On the one hand, they get an advantage over their competitors because they face a carbon price. So if they're carbon efficient, they get an advantage because of that. On the second place, they get another advantage because they have a lower company tax rate. So it is a win-win for the New Zealand economy and pushes our economy in a very ever so gently way at a pretty low price towards a more efficient economy in terms of greenhouse emissions, which prepares us for the economy of the 21st century, where those who have low carbon intensive economies will prosper, and those who lock themselves into very carbon inefficient economies like New Zealand, where we have much higher greenhouse emissions per unit of GDP, economies like ours will suffer as the world starts to clamp down on greenhouse emissions. And unfortunately, the government is looking backwards to the 20th century and the 19th century by locking New Zealand into this high carbon intensive economy, while the Green Party is very much focused on innovation and taking advantage of the opportunities that are in the world. Because the Green Party looks out to the rest of the world, while the National Party looks inward and doesn't understand what's going on in the rest of the world. There are a few other, I think, salient points with regard to the government's economic strategy. If you look at tourism, Tourism New Zealand is currently seeking ideas for how to protect the 100% pure brand because it's being degraded by all the stories about the degradation of New Zealand's natural environment, in particular the extensive pollution of our fresh water now. Our rivers and our lakes are highly polluted. There is another way other than propaganda or PR to protect 100% pure, and that is to actually take action to clean up our rivers and lakes. And the Green Party will take action to clean up our rivers and lakes. It is entirely doable. It's not easy to do, but we will do it. Under the current government, they are literally subsidising to the tune of $400 million increased water pollution. So the taxpayer is having to subsidise more water pollution. When you look at transport, the government is increasing spending, tens of billions of dollars being spent on new motorways, while the rest of the world is embracing public transport, that is buses, trains, ferries. They're also embracing walking and cycling to make more livable cities with lower carbon emissions and much cleaner air. That is the opportunity for New Zealand. We have a government heading in the wrong direction. They tell us that we must have more cars and more roads. Actually, the reality is the whole world is heading towards much more carbon-efficient transport, much more livable cities, much greater support for public transport, walking and cycling. And that's where the Green Party will take New Zealand down that path. When it comes to the primary sector, of course, our entire primary sector exports are built on clean, green and safe. The government is intent on destroying that brand by undermining the environmental foundations of it. The Green Party will clean up our natural environment and hence protect our clean, green and safe brand, which is the foundation of our food export sector. In all these different ways, the Green Party, I think, is demonstrating the way forward, while the National Party has its face to the past and doesn't understand the opportunities and the realities of the 21st century globe in which we live. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Paul Goldsmith.
Speaker, I find it a bit galling to have a lecture on being outward-looking from a member from the Green Party.